Celeb Savant is a career retrospective type interview focusing on singers, actors, and industry experts. Join Barrett Edelstein now as he dives into the entertainment world.
British Daniel Everitt-Lock is a London-based director and cinematographer with a decade of professional credits across film and television. As a cinematographer, his work spans productions for Amazon, HBO, and the BBC across more than a dozen feature films and multiple television series. He is an active member of the IATSE 667 and an associate member of the Canadian Society of Cinematographers, who previously nominated him for Best Dramatic Short for Challenger. Our Planet, the People, My Blood is his feature documentary debut, 3 years in development and 150,000 kilometers in the making. Principal photography required Daniel and co-producer Rodrigo Borda to travel across 3 continents. Our Planet, the People, My Blood is a documentary feature that reveals the global story of nuclear injustice. Alan Owen, a descendant of an atomic soldier, has fought tirelessly for the rights of those affected by nuclear weapons testing around the world. Through global first-hand accounts, we follow Alan on his journey as he takes on the UK Ministry of Defence in a landmark legal battle that seeks recognition and compensation for millions. Up next on Celeb Savant, discussing his journey in the entertainment world and his featured documentary debut, Our Planet, the People, My Blood, is Daniel Everitt-Lock. Where in the world are you and how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. I am currently in the UK. I'm moving houses, so I'm back with my parents for a little moment before moving to a new place in London. So, yeah.
So now let's rewind. At what age, whether as a child or teenager, did you think, okay, you want to be in this creative world? And how did that journey progress?
Oh, man, my journey's a little bit of a kind of, I mean, everybody's journey is a little bit crazy in this industry, I think, but I think my kind of progression was a bit strange. I originally started as a photographer. Well, I mean, I had a passion for photography since I was like kind of a teenager, really. And then I'd also been training martial arts for, I mean, it's now like 20 odd years kind of thing. And so kind of when I was I think 21, when I first moved to London for the first time, I ended up kind of falling into acting, which turned into stunt work. And then we started making our own work off the back of that. And that led me to kind of shooting films. And that was, I ended up enjoying that a lot more kind of thing. And that really became ultimately cinematography, and worked as a cinematographer for the last 14 years, kind of professionally. And then along that kind of path, in directing, whatever kind of comes up that's been, of interest.
What does it mean to be a cinematographer?
I mean, as a cinematographer, my job is obviously to kind of like create the image and the look of a film or a TV series or whatever it is kind of thing. It's a very like collaborative position. You work very, very closely with a director to kind of, bring visually what they're trying to tell through, that visual medium kind of thing. I think, it used to be back in the days of film and stuff, it was a very kind of like, only really the cinematographer would be seeing what's going to kind of come through, and they'd know what kind of comes through, and you watch dailies and stuff kind of thing. It would be a little bit of a different process, and there's kind of a little bit more ownership to the image than there is these days necessarily. I think these days there's a lot more kind of a lot more cooks in the kitchen kind of thing as well.
Obviously, you guys collaborate a lot with the set designers, surely, because if you look creating the look and the feel of the project, then don't you work very closely with the set team?
Yeah. Production designer and me will be like working together very closely in prep, and for me as a cinematographer, kind of like it's all about a location. And so if it's a studio build, for instance, then the production designer and me, I ideally like to work very closely. Me, the director, and the production designer really do kind of collaborate a lot from the very beginning.
And now, when did you decide that you wanted to start directing?
My focus has been cinematography. And then that's been kind of like the career push, and the thing that I've always kind of promoted myself as. But then the thing of directing kind of comes along every now and again when I find something that I really want to make myself. And it's never really been much of actively pushed until kind of now where I think it's like, okay, this actually is something that suits me as well as cinematography, and I enjoy as much as just being a cinematographer.
Are there any other situations lately when you're working more as just a cinematographer on a project and you're seeing director eyes through that lens, and then you have to hold yourself back and think, okay, I'm just a cinematographer on this set. That's the director. Has that ever happened?
uh, I think everybody on set has their thoughts and ideas of how they would make the film. I mean, every person would direct it differently. My job when I'm the cinematographer is to serve that director and whatever their vision is, kind of thing. So then it's like I try and get myself in their shoes and do that thing. So yeah, I think, maybe there's moments where it's like, I do it differently, but it's kind of like, well, okay, this is their vision. I know I can trust them to do what they want. So kind of we stick to the plan.
You mentioned that you're going to focus more on directing, and it's more intentional now. So are you looking more for more projects in this space, or are you just going to, as they flow through, grab and choose when they come in?
Cinematography has always been the career, and then it's like it's the directing side is kind of like if it happens, it happens as and when. I'm kind of picky a little bit. I'm not interested in directing things for the sake of building a career or doing something that I
Okay.
really want to do as a director. I do that, as a cinematographer sometimes when it's like, okay, this could be a good job. It's maybe not my perfect fit, but it's like this is good, kind of thing. Sometimes you do have to do things, for a living and stuff, that kind of thing. I'm not interested in really doing that as a director, and I kind of want to make sure the things that I do are things that I can fully commit myself to. Because I think if you're not both feet fully in on a project, it's kind of hard to as a director these days, you have to be so totally committed in every way. So it's kind of hard if you're not like fully on board that
Yeah.
thing.
So now tell us about this latest project, your first directorial debut.
Yeah, so it's called Our Planet, The People, My Blood. Even though a lot of my career I've worked in scripted and narrative work, this is actually a documentary. And it's a documentary, it's an expose of communities affected by nuclear weapons testing. So this is actually something I wanted to make for the last kind of decade, really, after seeing a short documentary about these soldiers that were subjected to nuclear weapons testing. A lot of them kind of from UK, US, France, Russia, China, and stuff. There's a lot of them conscripted actually, and sent out to different locations, far away from their homes, kind of thing, and stuck in front of these, nuclear or thermonuclear weapons destination. And the result on them physically from these bombs, even though sometimes they were like 20 miles away from the explosion, the impact they had and what they saw and the radiation issues that has affected their DNA and their, ultimately their family, for generations to come, kind of thing, is insane. And the thing that kind of caught me, like about 9, 10 years ago when I first saw this short documentary, was about these guys talking about the flash of the nuclear weapon, it being so bright, and then being told to stand and facing away from the explosion with their hands over their eyes, with their eyes closed. The flash was so bright they could still see the x-ray of their hands, all the bones and the tendons, and the x-ray of people in front of them through their closed eyes. And that, from a visual perspective, just stuck with me as like this crazy thing. And then after that, kind of learning more about this kind of like subjects and realizing that it was never in my education growing up. After talking to friends and family and stuff as well, it was never really in their education either. And I realized that not many people actually really know about much about nuclear weapons testing and the insane amount of impacts it's had and what was really done. And I was like, this would make an incredible documentary. So then about 6, 7 years later, it came to a point where I'd actually shot a couple of feature documentaries and a documentary series for like Amazon and stuff. And I was kind of in a position where I was like, okay, I think realistically, I have the experience now from being on set and seeing these directors work, that kind of thing, and seeing how they're produced and stuff, that I could tackle my own documentary myself, this film that I'd wanted to make.
You said it took 10 years to make. Why such a long period of time?
Well, no, no, no. It's actually It's taken 4 years to make
Oh, okay.
at this point. But it was about 10 years ago that I first kind of learned about
Oh,
that sort of
okay,
stuff.
okay.
So it has taken 4 years. 2 years of that we've kind of been we were filming. We traveled 150,000 kilometers over the course of those 2 years, all over Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, and the US, 20 different states in the US, Hawaii. There was and trying to do that on I think to put it lightly, a shoestring budget is obviously pretty difficult. So it took time to be able to pull all of that together. And the initial idea started as this thing about these soldiers and these guys that experienced the nuclear weapon. But then we very quickly learned after the first few interviews with these guys and meeting our main guy, Alan Owen, who's the descendant of one of these atomic veterans, that there is all these other communities that have been affected on a global scale. There's like Hibakusha, who the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings. There's the uranium mining communities. There's the downwinders all across the US and like Kazakhstan. There's the Marshallese people who just got ripped away from their islands. Now their islands like disintegrated. All these different communities, and a bunch of others as well. There's all these different communities and people, and we realized that there was more to the story. So then it developed from the initial idea of just about these soldiers, and it turned into this global perspective of nuclear weapons testing and how it's affected everyone. But again, keeping Alan at the core of the story.
So, what couple of aspects can you tell us that most people don't know that people have been affected by these testing, that what you found shocking during the process of this story?
Yeah, I mean, really, we learned about it all from scratch, and it was really a big kind of learning curve as we went through. I didn't realize that from the very beginning, learning about the soldiers and stuff kind of thing was one thing, but then we learned more that their DNA was affected from the radiation, that this bombardment of radiation that hit them from the tests. So then that's then affected their descendants and their children and their children's children and kind of thing. So at this point, they're having huge amounts of like miscarriages and deformities and cancers and genetic conditions that are being passed down that were never in their family line before. But now, since the nuclear weapons testing, you have all these new kind of conditions that have just been introduced into that family bloodline kind of thing. And the science kind of shows that realistically that those effects won't really wash out from that gene pool for the next kind of 500 years.
Oh,
So you're
wow.
talking generations and generations of families that are going to be deeply impacted. So that's like, the soldiers kind of thing. But then we went down to the US and you find out that really the whole of the US was just kind of subject to this fallout from the nuclear weapons testing in Nevada. And they just kind of pumped out tons and tons of radiation that just spread across the entire country. A lot of people, certainly closer to Nevada and downwind of those areas kind of thing, places like we went to that was like, Salt Lake City and St. George kind of thing, really, really heavily impacted. The people there just really like, a lot of people don't even realize, they don't even know that they had such an impact on them. There's a really interesting story actually from the US tests that they're testing over in Nevada on the west side of the US. And then you've got Kodak, where they were developing a film in the east side of the US, northeast side of the US. There was so much fallout coming across the US from west to east that it was actually affecting the stock that they were creating at the Kodak factory. So it got to the point that when they were testing in Nevada, they were actually informing Kodak to bring any of their stuff inside because it was fogging the film, right? So there's actual proof that entire fallout was spreading across the entire country. There's a lot of things we learned. Some of the things that didn't make the documentary is also just as interesting as the things that did. Terrible things like Project Sunshine. Now, Project Sunshine was a thing. I don't know, was it CIA or I'm not sure which government agency in the US did that kind of thing. I'm not sure what the thing is exactly, but Project Sunshine was basically where they were digging up deceased babies and taking the bones from these babies to test them for strontium-90 levels without the consent of the families or the parents or anybody. And this was going on for years as a documented case. And it's just like, concept of it is just terrible. There's certain things like that we just weren't able to fit into the narrative of the documentary because multiple reasons. We've got a bit of a flow of things, stuff like that. The plutonium files is another one. Like, you should look that up. It's insane.
So obviously you had this shoestring budget and there was a lot of traveling. What other challenges did you face during the creation of this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, the budget thing was really the difficult thing. I think, yes, there was a bunch of times where, I mean, some of the funny ones is I kind of got ill a couple of times, actually, both in the US. One was really, really stupid. Me and my business partner Rodrigo, we actually like long journey and stuff. We went for a run like one evening and went past all these like kind of crop fields and stuff, and all this stuff that had been sprayed on him. I had some crazy allergic reaction to it, and my eyes closed up, my nose swelled up, my ears were like it was just the most mad shit. I don't know what the hell happened to me, so let's go to hospital and kind of get that sorted. I don't know what that was about. That was kind of a weird one. Food poisoning and stuff, and I think all mad stuff like that. There's some very interesting things in Australia as well. We actually there's a very fun story where we went out during the day, and we were out with this indigenous one of the guys we were interviewing, Jeremy, who's one of our main guys in the film, and we're out with him, and we come across a dingo, and he tells us how like dingoes in their culture are kind of this very like spiritual animal and this very important animal within their culture. And we don't manage to get a very good shot of it, so then it's like, never mind, that's a shame. That evening we're camping in Maralinga, where the UK tested nuclear weapons, like right in the middle of the outback in Australia. So there's just nothing, there's plants and stuff, and that's it. Go out in the middle of the night 'cause it's this full moon. It's incredibly beautiful. Like it's just everything is lit by the moon. You can see almost everything. It's incredible. And this dog-shaped figure kind of comes towards me, and I'm like, oh wow, like, the hell's that? And it turns out it's a dingo. I'm like, oh, it's amazing, this beautiful spiritual animal in this full moon in the middle of the, like outback. I think it was this very like interesting kind of experience. And then you hear this rustling in the bushes, and there's another one coming, and then there's another coming from the other side. And I'm like, oh shit, these things are hunting me.
Oh my God.
So it's like, oh crap. Okay, so you kind of like scare them off. It's like, oh, it's just it was this moment of like, oh, really spiritual, lovely, and then it was like, oh, I have to scare them away, So fun things like that. And there was also more like difficult things as well, where like our editor let me down, and so we had to pivot very quickly, and I ended up editing the film with the help of a lot of some very, very experienced editors as well, which was lovely, with their advice and stuff. We had one broadcaster that actually, after we pitched to them, ended up taking a different route with another production company, and then called us up asking to license our footage. And I was like, are you kidding me? So they became a race against these guys to try and do something which we couldn't, because, they have money and we didn't. So it was kind of a difficult situation there. So learning how to pivot on things like that as well. We kind of approached this documentary in a way that we never wanted to sign anybody for exclusivity. The reason for that was because it's kind of more of an ethical thing of like these communities are, if they have the opportunity to get their story out as much as possible, it's really kind of important.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the person that's stopping that because of some crappy exclusivity thing for our documentary, which, from a business perspective on the documentary side is very risky. But from an ethical side, I thought it was more important to not do that. And that became an issue, which is fair enough. But I'd rather stand on the side of like doing something right than anything else. It's worked out in the end,
Yes.
So it's okay.
You referenced earlier that you've worked on scripted shows and documentaries in different iterations, director, cinematographer, and so forth. For you, the main difference between working on a documentary compared to working on a scripted film or show?
I much prefer the process of working on scripted stuff. I like the idea of, it's lovely having prep and kind of coming up with this visual playbook of what you want and kind of designing what you kind of go forward with, and then pulling that out in a little bit more of a planned sort of way. Documentary, you do the same thing. Don't get me wrong, there is like a certain level of that, but there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of things that you work out on the fly a little bit that kind of you need to learn to, I think documentary is a really good learning curve to bring back into scripted. I think if the experience you get from doing that as a cinematographer and as a director kind of thing, really you can bring that into scripted in a way that I think really does improve your storytelling, both visually and in general scripted. So I think there is a lot of difference in the prep for sure. There's a lot of difference in the editing process as well, of course, which I learned very quickly when I had to edit the documentary.
Yes.
One of my things actually was my nightmare scenario was I never ever wanted to edit a feature documentary. And I ended up in that position, and it was just like, this is just Yeah, my kind of anecdote of the thing is if you want to learn a new skill, edit a feature documentary because you procrastinate so much, you end up doing something else. So I ended up relearning the drums again during my time editing. Took us about a year to edit these things together properly.
The documentary is out now. Where can a person see it? Is it available everywhere, or how can a person catch wind of it?
Yeah, so we've got a theatrical release happening in the UK starting 14th of May. So we're screening in about 30, 40 different locations all over the UK. Then we've got some theatrical screenings coming up in Canada, Australia, the US and stuff. They're still in the works somewhat, so they're coming up. And then we've got a bunch of broadcasters that have we're just sorting deals out with the film as well. So we're going to see where it's going from a broadcast and streaming perspective after the theatrical run. So later this year, it'll be available for wider audiences, and then May we start our big theatrical push.
Obviously, there's the website where people can get all this information
Yep,
of where it's showing. So the website is.
atomicblood.com. I'm working with this really good distributor that we're taking on this really interesting strategy and kind of like almost like an event style cinema release, kind of combined with a more traditional cinema release, and it seems to be working.
So obviously
Yeah.
now you're working and your focus is on this documentary, which is amazing and very exciting to hear about. I know it's all very secretive in your guys' world. What else can you tell us is coming up over the next period of time, or your direct focus is the documentary for this moment?
I've got a couple of little projects in the works. As a cinematographer, I'm shooting another Amazon doc series actually out in Canada. That's been kind of fun. That's almost wrapped up. That's going to be coming out at the end of the year. And then as a director, I've got a couple of projects that we're pitching around, a couple of feature pieces that I'd love to make next. So we'll see where they land. Some good conversations. We're getting some good people attached to us. That's kind of fun. Yeah, that's the main thing. Yeah, and then obviously focusing heavily on the documentary right now, man.
So you mentioned pitching and things landing. Obviously, in your world, there's a lot of
Mm.
knocking on doors, doors closing, no's happening. From your personal experience, how have you kept your positivity through a bunch of doors closing?
Dude, the thing of making this film was just like that was an ultimate test of trying to stay positive. To put it into perspective, like this one, Our Planet, the People, My Blood, we ended up ton of applications for public funds, nothing came through. Ultimately, the production company is in Canada, and so it was a lot of Canadian funds we were going for. Ultimately, the feedback was this film is not Canadian enough, which fair enough, totally get it. Okay,
Yeah.
fine. So that means like a lot of public funding kind of like no go, which unfortunately, is unfortunate. That's the main thing these days, particularly for new directors and new production companies and stuff. That is the main source. We've got tax credits kind of thing. It's one thing that's we can work with kind of thing. But it's difficult, man. Honestly, private financing is definitely kind of like a very useful thing at this point. Tax credits, leveraging those kind of things is really important. But yeah, public funds is quite difficult right now. I think it's more oversubscribed than it ever has been. I got told some rather shocking figures from like Telefilm and BFI recently, which is kind of like, oh, okay, that's kind of depressing. So that's pretty hard. Yeah, it's difficult, man. Pitching like I think if you get lucky and you do really well, you're the best options kind of thing are with, we pitch directly to distributors and and see where we get to with that, and if they'll take on the film, and then we
Mm.
get greenlit and we go from there with their budget, and then that becomes a nice thing. If you want to do it independently right now at this point, it's kind of like private funds is your main source, is the best option right now. Public funds is the thing, but it's tough, like really tough.
A lot of producers or movie houses, specifically more in
Mm.
Hollywood, are requesting simplified scripts because now people are so busy on their cell phones while they're watching the TV and watching the movies and so on and so forth. So the television movie has become now the second screen. In my mind, the scripts should be more structured, more convoluted, more enticing. It shouldn't be simplified because you want to catch their attention and keep their attention. What are your thoughts around this conversation?
Dude, I'm 100% with you. 100, like I think it's like there's from what we did with this film in the sense that I'm aiming it towards a little bit more of a modern audience. So it was a case of like keeping the time down, keeping it fast and punchy, and keeping it so interesting that it's like you don't want to move away to another screen. I love the fact that theatrical kind of forces people into that perspective of you have to sit in a dark room and focus in on this thing, and nicely, it's a voluntarily, like, people go to do that kind of thing, so I like that kind of thing. But, if you look at Project Hail Mary, it's really an interesting one, right?
Yes.
Independent piece, the most as a non-franchise film for the last, like, 20 years or something kind of crazy. It's done amazing. And watching it is it's actually become one of my favorite films, honestly. It's absolutely fantastically well done, really well executed. It's a really interesting story. It's very original and kind of, and I think that it's not a simplified thing. It's not the most overly complicated artistic thing ever, but it is absolutely not this simplified, dumbed down thing. I think, it's very original, and I think there's a reason why it's done so well, because it is original, and it's actually good, and it's not just some franchise, like, algorithm written piece of crap. There is demand for that, but there is also the problem on the business side, the people that finance these things and, like, kind of put these things out there and have to take the financial risk, that there is so little room for financial risk because things are so tight these days, and the industry's kind of gone in the way that it has because of lots of different reasons. So I think that lack of ability to take that kind of financial risk on something original is the problem right now, even though I do believe there is audiences that really do want something original. Clearly it works. But yeah, these, a lot of companies can't just take that risk.
So, Daniel, the podcast is listened to throughout the world. As a final message, what would you like to say?
If you get the chance, take a look at labrats.international, okay? That'll give you, that's Alan Owen's organization, our main guy. He's the guy that basically pulled all of these, created Labrats as a way of bringing all these different communities together and talking about the issues. It's a really important issue that has affected, to some degree, every single person alive. I think it is important to know, and I think ultimately the main message and theme out of this film, the subject matter is obviously nuclear weapons testing, these communities affected, but our theme ultimately is injustice and how crazy it is that your own government can ultimately treat people the way that it does. Its own people, other people. It's ridiculous. So I think there needs to be more demand for, nowadays more than ever, looking at a kind of like political kind of landscape and what's going on kind of thing, there needs to be more demand from the public of what really the governments are really doing. Pay attention.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Celeb Savant. Please follow Barrett on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Celeb Savant. That's CelebSavant.